The powder that eliminates pests from your garden replaces fertilizers. There's a powder that's been around since before any modern lab ever opened its doors. A powder your grandparents knew, that the earth knows, that insects know in their most brutal way. It costs less than a few bucks. You can get it at any farm supply store or compounding pharmacy, and in a single application, it solves what the pesticide industry has been selling you bottle after bottle, season after season, for decades, without the problem ever completely disappearing. That's exactly what I'm here to show you today. It's not theory, it's not an empty promise, it's physics. And once you understand how it works, you'll also understand why no one at an agrochemical store will ever recommend it to you. Before we continue, I need to tell you something I think is important. What you're about to hear in this video is a narrative built from interpretations of real facts, documented research, historical patents, and good practices within agricultural legality. The purpose is educational, guiding, and also, honestly, to entertain you while you learn something that can change how you grow your own food. Take what's useful, verify what you want to verify, apply what makes sense for your reality. If this kind of knowledge is what you're looking for, hit like now and subscribe to the channel. What's coming in the next videos goes much deeper than this. All right, let's get to the point. The powder is called diatomaceous earth, and the first thing you need to know is where it comes from, because that explains everything. Millions of years ago, the oceans were full of microscopic organisms called diatoms, a type of single-celled algae with a unique characteristic. Their cell walls were made of silica, basically natural glass. When these algae died, they settled on the seabed, layer upon layer, for millions of years. Over time, these deposits fossilized, and today, when that material is extracted and finally ground, what you get is a powder that looks like talc to the naked eye, but under a microscope reveals something different: a network of sharp microscopic edges, invisible to the human eye. And here's the mechanism that changes everything. When an insect comes into contact with this powder, those silica edges cut the exoskeleton. They don't poison it, they cut it. The protective layer the insect uses to retain internal moisture is compromised, and the insect dies from dehydration in hours, not days. What makes this mechanism different from any chemical pesticide is this: there's no way to develop resistance to physics. An insect can, over generations, develop a tolerance to a chemical compound. Evolution allows for that, but there's no gene that protects against a sharp edge. There's no mutation that hardens an exoskeleton enough. It's like trying to develop resistance to a blade. You can't. And for a pesticide manufacturer's business model, that's catastrophic. Because if the mechanism never fails, the customer never buys their product again. A customer who discovers diatomaceous earth stops being a customer of the chemical industry forever, and that has a name: permanent market loss. Now I'm going to tell you something personal. My name is Juarez, I'm 56 years old, and I've been working the land for over 3 decades. I've seen methods come and methods go. I've burned through money on pesticides that promised to eliminate pests, and what they actually eliminated was my patience and my wallet. And there's something I'm a little embarrassed to admit. It took me too long to listen to my father. A few months ago, after a long time where things weren't good between us, my father and I really talked again. It was one of those conversations that start slowly, carefully, because we both knew there'd been a distance. His separation from who was my stepmother for years affected us all in ways none of us handled well. There was silence, too much silence. But that day, sitting in the backyard of his house in Oaxaca, with the smell of damp earth that place always had, he pointed to a small sack tucked away in the corner of the shed and said, "Do you still use poison for pests?" I told him yes. What else was I going to use? And he chuckled in that quiet way he has, as if he knew something you didn't, and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. He grabbed that sack, put it in my hands. Diatomaceous earth. He told me his father, my grandfather, used it in the 70s before they filled our heads with chemicals. That it worked then and it works now, because nature didn't change, insects didn't change, physics didn't change. Only those who had something to sell did. That conversation gave me back more than just an agricultural technique. It gave me back my father, and it gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd lost: Trust in simple knowledge. That's why I'm here today, to pass it on to you. Diatomaceous earth isn't a new discovery. Its use against stored grain pests has been documented since the 1870s, with studies from the University of Nebraska reporting over 95% effectiveness against weevils, moths, and other storage insects. In 1960, research by the United States Department of Agriculture documented its application as a non-chemical, physical control agent, precisely because of its mechanical mechanism that's impossible to counter with evolutionary resistance. By the 70s, when large agrochemical companies began to dominate the market with their patented formulations, diatomaceous earth was a problem for them. Not because it didn't work, but precisely because it did work and because there was no way to patent it. It's a natural mineral. Deposits exist all over the world. Anyone can extract it, process it, and sell it without paying royalties to anyone. The strategy wasn't to prove it was inferior. The strategy was to make the knowledge disappear. Fund publications that emphasize its limitations, remove it from agronomy curricula, and have field technicians always recommend the chemical product because the chemical product had a sales representative, had commission, had a sales structure. Diatomaceous earth had none of that. In 2 generations, the knowledge disappeared from everyday practice. Farmers who used it in the 50s stopped teaching it to their children. The children grew up buying pesticides, and the grandchildren, like us for too many years, didn't even know the powder existed. But the powder kept existing. The physics remained the same. There's something the industry could never change. Food-grade diatomaceous earth, the version you should always specify as food grade, is recognized by the American FDA as safe for use in grains intended for human consumption. Anvisa in Brazil and its equivalents in other countries classify it as permitted in certified organic agriculture. You can apply it in your garden today and harvest tomorrow with no waiting period, no toxic residue, no risk to your children or animals. No chemical pesticide on the market can say the same. All of them have a waiting period. All of them require waiting between 10 and 21 days after application before harvesting, precisely because they are poison, and poison needs time to dissipate into the environment. Diatomaceous earth doesn't need that time because it doesn't enter the plant, doesn't contaminate the fruit, doesn't accumulate in the soil. It acts mechanically on the surface, and that alone completely transforms what it means to grow food at home. Here's something I want you to remember. This isn't speculation. It's the business model exposed. A product that works forever, can't be patented, doesn't require repurchase, doesn't generate recurring customers, and without recurring customers, there's no industry. That's the logic that explains everything else. Now, if what I just explained resonated with you, if you feel there's more knowledge like this that no one taught you, but which can change how you feed your family, I'll tell you something with complete sincerity. The question my father asked me that day in Oaxaca wasn't just about pests. It was about something deeper. What happens when the market fails? What happens when the product you need isn't in the store, or the price skyrockets, or you just can't get there? What does your family eat? That question is what led me to gather techniques like this for months. Simple, verifiable, replicable methods in a small yard, in pots, in any space, without relying on brands or sales seasons. All of that is in the digital book, The Buried Knowledge, with the link in the description of this video. It's not free because it took time, research, and verification, but it costs less than a season of chemical pesticide and lasts you forever. Just like this powder, now comes what really matters, because knowing that there's a powder that eliminates insects is useless if you don't understand why it works, how to apply it correctly, and at what exact moment you're sabotaging your own results without realizing it. Those 3 points are what we're going to solve here. One by one, no beating around the bush. I'm going to start with the mechanism, not because it's theory, but because when you understand what's happening at a microscopic level, you'll never again doubt whether this works or not, and you'll never again make the mistakes that prevent it from working. Under a microscope, diatomaceous earth doesn't look like powder. It looks like a network of glass fragments with irregular edges, some curved, some straight, all sharp. Each particle is the fossilized skeleton of a diatom, a single-celled organism whose cell wall was made of silicon dioxide, pure silica, the same material as glass, but on a microscopic scale and in forms that nature took millions of years to perfect. When an insect walks on a surface treated with diatomaceous earth, these particles stick to its body. They can't avoid it. Insect exoskeletons have an outer layer called the epicuticle, an extremely thin, waxy film whose main function is to retain internal moisture. Without that layer, the insect loses water, and without water, it dies. What the silica does is exactly that. It opens that waxy layer, mechanically erodes it. It doesn't dissolve it, doesn't poison it, it physically wears it down until it stops performing its function. The insect begins to lose moisture irreversibly. Depending on the insect's size and environmental conditions, death occurs between 2 and 48 hours after contact. And here's the detail that changes everything from the standpoint of long-term effectiveness. This mechanism cannot be neutralized by evolution. An insect can, over generations, develop enzymes that break down a chemical compound. It can develop proteins that block a nerve receptor. It can mutate to survive a poison. But there is no genetic mutation that hardens an exoskeleton enough to resist the physical wear and tear of silica particles. It's geometry versus biology, and geometry always wins. That's what my father tried to explain to me that day in Oaxaca, when he put the sack in my hands. He didn't use these words. He said it differently. The way men who work the land their whole lives say it. This powder doesn't lie. Poison lies. This doesn't. It took me too long to understand the difference. Let's continue now, because diatomaceous earth isn't just for the garden. That's what most people don't tell you, and that error in perspective is what limits most people who discover it. They only use it on plants, see partial results, and conclude that it works, but not that well. It works that well. The problem is that pests don't just live on the plant. Think about how a real infestation works. The ants that attack your plants don't live on your plants. They live in the soil, in cracks, around the perimeter of your garden, or inside your house. If you only treat the plants, you're putting a barrier at a transit point, but the source remains intact. It's like setting a trap halfway when the nest is 10 meters away. Diatomaceous earth works as a system when you treat it as a system. That means applying it in layers, in zones, with a defense logic that covers the entire path a pest takes from its origin to your crop. First zone, the perimeter, a continuous line around the entire growing area. It doesn't have to be thick. It has to be uninterrupted. A 1 millimeter gap in that line is enough for ants to find their way through. Continuity is more important than quantity. Second zone, the base of each plant, a circle around the stem, 2 or 3 centimeters away. This is the last barrier before the insect reaches the plant. If the perimeter fails, this zone stops what got through. Third zone, the soil between plants. Larvae live there, slugs live there. The weevils that will attack your stored grains start there. A light application on the soil surface between your plants interrupts the life cycle of dozens of insects before they become a problem. Fourth zone, the leaves. Lightly dust the undersides of the leaves. This is where most chewing insects feed. Aphids, small caterpillars, thrips. A fine layer on the underside of the leaves creates a contact barrier that eliminates the problem at the source. And fifth zone, the one most people ignore, inside the house and storage. If you store grains, flour, legumes, any dry food at home, food-grade diatomaceous earth can go directly into the storage container, a thin layer at the bottom of the jar or bag, a layer on top of the grains. No weevil, no moth, no storage larva survives that environment, and the food remains completely safe for consumption because the product is food grade for grains you'll sow next season. The application is the same, 1 part diatomaceous earth for every 10 parts of stored grain. University of Nebraska studies from the 70s documented protection rates over 95% using exactly that proportion, with no toxic residue, no impact on seed germination capacity. That means you can store your own protected seeds for seasons without buying anything new, without depending on anyone. And there's something I want to emphasize here because I think it's the point most people overlook when they discover this technique. Food autonomy doesn't start with the plant, it starts with the seed you save, with the grain that isn't lost to weevils, with the pantry that doesn't need chemicals to stay clean. When you have that whole system working together, the garden, protected plants, safely stored grains, seeds ready for the next season, you're not just someone who has a garden, you're someone who has a system. And systems don't depend on the market. Systems depend on who operates them. That's what took me too long to understand, and it's what I hope you understand today before it takes you as long as it took me. That's the complete system, not just a technique, a defense system that covers everything from the soil to storage, from the garden to the pantry. Now comes the part nobody wants to hear. But what is the most important of everything I'm going to say today? There are people who apply diatomaceous earth, see no results, and conclude that it doesn't work, and they're right in their experience. But they're wrong in their conclusion. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that they made one or more of the mistakes that guarantee it won't work, and I'm going to give them all to you. Error 1, applying it wet or in a high humidity environment. This is the most common error and the one that causes the most frustration. Diatomaceous earth completely loses its effectiveness when it's wet. The reason is mechanical. The silica particles need to be loose, free to adhere to the insect's exoskeleton. When the powder absorbs moisture, the particles clump together, form a mass, and that mass doesn't adhere to the exoskeleton, doesn't wear anything down. Applying diatomaceous earth after rain, on wet soil, or on days with high relative humidity is wasting the product. The result will be zero, and you'll think the product failed. It didn't fail. You applied it under conditions that prevent it from working. The rule is simple. Always apply it in dry conditions. Dry soil, dry environment, with no rain forecast for the next few hours. If it rains after application, reapply when everything is dry again, not before. Error 2, using the industrial version instead of the food-grade version. There are two types of diatomaceous earth on the market, and they are fundamentally different. The industrial version, used in pool filters and manufacturing processes, undergoes a high-temperature calcination process that crystallizes the silica. That process increases the content of crystalline quartz, which is a severe lung irritant classified as potentially dangerous with prolonged exposure. Don't use it in your garden, don't use it near animals, don't use it near your children. The food-grade version, grado alimenticio, does not undergo that process. It keeps the silica in amorphous, non-crystalline form, which is the safe form for agricultural and domestic use. It's the one approved for direct contact with food. It's the one you should always look for. When you go to buy, explicitly ask for diatomaceous earth food grade. In farm supply stores, it may simply appear as diatomaceous earth for organic use. If the label mentions use in swimming pools or industrial processes, it's not the correct version. Error 3, applying in thick layers. More is not better, it's worse. A thick layer of diatomaceous earth doesn't create a more effective barrier. It creates an obstacle that insects simply avoid. Ants, especially when they encounter a mound of powder, go around it, they don't cross it. A thin, almost transparent uniform layer is the correct application. The insect has to pass through it without realizing it's there. That's the logic. Invisible, but effective. If you can clearly see accumulated powder, you probably put too much. A practical way to gauge the correct amount: put a small amount in the palm of your hand and gently blow it over the surface you want to treat. That amount, well distributed, is enough for 1 square meter. It seems like very little. It's exactly the right amount. Error 4, applying it only once and forgetting about it. Diatomaceous earth doesn't disappear from the soil, but it can be displaced. Strong wind, rain, sprinkler irrigation, the passage of people or animals in the treated area. All of that can reduce coverage, especially in the first or second week after application. The correct practice is to check coverage every week, especially after rain or irrigation, and reapply in areas where the layer has diminished. Over time, as your garden's dynamics stabilize, you'll know exactly when and where to reapply. It becomes routine, 5 minutes every week. And that routine is important not just for the product's effectiveness. It's important because it forces you to observe your garden closely, to walk through it, to see what's happening in the soil, on the leaves, along the perimeter. Most serious problems in a garden can be prevented when you detect them early. And you detect them early when you have the habit of looking. Diatomaceous earth, paradoxically, gives you a reason to look at your garden every week with intention. That's worth more than the powder itself. Error 5. Not treating the source of the pest, only the symptom. I already talked about this before, but it's worth repeating here because it's the conceptual error that underlies all the others. If you have an active anthill 20 meters from your garden and only treat the plants, diatomaceous earth will kill the ants that cross the barrier. But the anthill will keep sending more. You'll see dead ants. You'll think it's working, but the infestation will never end. The system works when you treat the entire path from the possible origin to the destination you want to protect. If the origin is within your property, treat it directly. Apply it at the entrance of the anthill, in the cracks where cockroaches hide, in the damp corners where slugs live. If the origin is outside your property, the continuous perimeter is your best defense. An uninterrupted line around the entire growing area, renewed after each rain. Before moving on to the next error, I want you to remember one number, 95%. That's the documented efficacy percentage in Nebraska studies against weevils in stored grains using correct proportions of food-grade diatomaceous earth. It's not a number I made up. It's in the records, and that number was obtained with correct application, under correct conditions, with the correct product. Not with hope, but with method. And there's one detail my father mentioned to me that day, almost in passing, as if it were obvious, but which took me a moment to understand. Diatomaceous earth doesn't discriminate. It kills any insect that crosses it, including beneficial ones. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. It means you need to be smart about where you apply it. Don't put it on flowers where bees will pollinate. Don't apply it on surfaces where beneficial insects living in your soil need to move. Use it at pest entry points, on the perimeter, at the base of plants, in storage, not as total coverage over every living surface. The intelligence of the system isn't in applying more, it's in applying it where it matters. That's what distinguishes someone who uses this knowledge as a tool from someone who uses it as hope. The tool works when you understand its logic. Hope always fails because it has no direction. And that's the final point I want to leave you with from this section. Your grandparents didn't have access to the Nebraska studies or the reports from the American Department of Agriculture, but they had something we lost: the habit of observing, testing, and learning directly from the earth. They knew this powder worked because they saw it work, because they applied it with good judgment, with patience, with logic. That habit is called embodied knowledge. It's not in a book, it's not in a video, it's in the hands of someone who did it, saw it work, and passed it on to the next person. My grandfather passed it to my father. My father, after too many years of silence between us, passed it to me, and I'm passing it on to you now. The chain wasn't broken, it was just interrupted. We lost it when someone arrived with a bottle of synthetic product that promised immediate and guaranteed results. And the promise was real, the result was real, but the cost, the one that didn't come on the label, was dependency. The cycle that never ended, the need to buy every season because the soil degraded, because pest resistance increased, because the system never became autonomous. Diatomaceous earth doesn't promise you immediacy, it promises permanence. And in a world where pesticide prices can triple from one season to the next, where the store might be closed when your harvest is at risk, where the delivery truck doesn't arrive, or the economy falters, that permanence has a value that no bottle of synthetic product can give you. A few dollars, a correct application, a system you understand, and the peace of mind of knowing that what you eat tomorrow doesn't depend on what someone decides to sell you today. That's what I came to teach you. Before you go, there are 3 questions I know you have that I can't leave unanswered. First, where to get it. In farm supply stores, you'll find it in 500 green bags for a very low price depending on your country. It lasts for months because you use little each time. In natural product stores, it may come in smaller packages. In compounding pharmacies, you can ask for it by its technical name: diatomaceous earth, food grade, or diatomite food grade. Any of those sources works. The only thing you always have to verify, without exception, is that it says food grade. That detail is everything. Second, does it work on flying insects? Yes, with one condition. For insects that fly and also land on treated surfaces, like flies, winged aphids, or thrips. The powder on the leaves acts by contact when they land. For insects that only fly and never touch the powder, there's no action. The mechanism is direct contact. Where there's contact, there's a result. Where there's no contact, there's no result. It's that simple and honest. Third, what if you already have an active infestation? Diatomaceous earth isn't an emergency exterminator. It's a control and prevention system. If your pest problem is already out of control, use it in combination with other immediate measures to stop the urgent damage, and then establish the permanent system. Once the system is working, reinfestation doesn't return. That's the ultimate goal. That covers all the points. What you have now isn't just information about a powder. It's a complete system, the mechanism that makes it work. The 5 application zones, the protection that goes from the garden to the pantry, the mistakes that sabotage it and how to avoid them, and where to get it today for less than you spent on a drink. The market will keep selling bottles. You already know you don't need them. If this information about diatomaceous earth has changed how you view caring for your garden and protecting your food, be sure to subscribe and like the channel. We're rescuing knowledge that others tried to hide so you can cultivate with freedom. Plant the seeds of your own future. The next treasure of ancestral wisdom will be revealed very soon.